Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we are looking at part 4 of this particular unit on arguably the most talented overall individual, male or female, to have ever been involved with the making of motion pictures. And I'm talking about the legendary Charlie Chaplin. Sir Charles Chaplin, which means, of course, that he was knighted, was an English comedic actor and film director. Chaplin became one of the most famous actors, as well as a notable filmmaker, composer, and musician in the early to mid classical Hollywood era of American cinema. Chaplin acted in, directed, scripted, produced, and eventually scored his own films as one of the most creative and influential personalities of the entire silent film era. His working life in entertainment spanned over 65 years, from the Victorian stage and the music hall in the UK as a child performer almost until his death at the age of 88. So this is Charlie Chaplin, somewhere in the 1910s, probably 1913, 14, somewhere around in there. And he looks extraordinarily young here. In this undated photograph. Chaplin's earliest films were made for Mack Sennett's Keystone Studios, where he developed his tramp character and very quickly learned the art and craft of filmmaking. The public first saw the Tramp, his most famous character, when Chaplin, at age 24, appeared in his second film to be released, called Kid Otto Races at Venice, in 1914. Another really famous comedian who we'll be talking about for another reason when we talk about the production code had really taken Chaplin under his wing, and I'm talking about a comedian by the name of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. And we're going to be talking about why that guy's famous or infamous here really soon. But this is the debut of Chaplin's tramp character. Chaplin devised the tramp costume when Mack Sennett of Keystone Studios requested that Charlie Chaplin get into a comedy makeup. As Chaplin recalled later in his autobiography, quote, "I had no idea what makeup to put on. I didn't like my get-up as a press reporter in my previous film, Making a Living. However, on the way to the wardrobe, I thought I would dress in baggy pants, big shoes, a cane, and a derby hat. I wanted everything to be a contradiction. The pants too baggy, but the coat too tight. The hat too small, and the shoes large. I was undecided whether to look old or young, but remembering that Sennett had expected me to be a much older man, I added a small mustache, which I reasoned would add age without hiding my expression. I had no idea of the character, but the moment I was dressed, the clothes and the makeup made me feel like the person he was. I began to know him, and by the time I walked on stage, the tramp character had fully been born," unquote. So here he is. This is Chaplin's tramp character, arguably the single most famous silent film star of all time, male or female, and a character that people generally singularly associate with the silent era. I love this quote by Chaplin. "A day without laughter is a day wasted." Boy, isn't that the truth. Charlie Chaplin nailed it on that one. The richness of the theme of the immigrant experience emerged in the work of Charlie Chaplin, whose tramp character embodied an essential ambivalence toward society. He sought its approval and acceptance, yet repeatedly found himself unable to conform to its demands. In such films as The Circus, released in 1928, and Modern Times in 1936, the tramp character would reconcile himself to outsider status and trudged on into the sunset in search of a more utopian social system. Now, here are a number of images from his early films, and these were made from 1914 to 1917. And right there in the middle, where my cursor moving around, is the man who took him under his wing. There's Fatty Arbuckle right there. And oh my, is he infamous. Again, we will be talking about him a bit later. Something that I think is very important to note here is that this theme of the immigrant that Chaplin wanted to be such a predominant theme of his work and the tramp character. Chaplin never, ever, ever wanted in any way, shape, or form to imply that he was ever making fun of immigrants. He was an immigrant himself. Charlie Chaplin knew what it was like to be excluded. His mother was a manic depressive and was half Jewish. So Charlie Chaplin would be on the receiving end of anti-Semitic criticism and prejudice and battled depression himself, in which he, to deal with that at that time, literally buried himself in his work. He was what we would call today a workaholic. Sometimes not even sleeping for days at a time, 3 and 4 days at a time. He would go without sleep as he threw himself into his work and edited and edited and edited the movie until it got to a point where he was satisfied and happy. He was a perfectionist, but he was also a depressive and would struggle with this his entire life. But there can be no doubt that he was a genius. Nobody in the silent film era could make you laugh, but also make you cry like Charlie Chaplin could. The first film that you guys are going to be watching is going to be The Immigrant. And I absolutely love this film because it's so enmeshed in what Chaplin wanted to be the theme of the tramp character. Much of Chaplin's comedy stemmed from the tension that existed between the tramp's conscious effort to fit in and win the acceptance of others, and his inherent resistance to authority and refusal to conform socially. And this film, on the right there, even though this is a theatrical poster, that is Edna Purviance, which Chaplin had a relationship both on screen and off with in many of his movies. She would make many, many, many films with Chaplin as his love interest, and even after they separated as a couple, she would maintain her status on Chaplin's payroll as a thank you for all the work that she had done for him on the screen until the day she would pass away. So she was a really big part of Chaplin's early work, and they continued to remain friends even after they had separated sometime later. The Immigrant is a very controversial film. It was, when it was released, responsible for drawing the attention of a very young J. Edgar Hoover, who was not happy at one scene in particular in this film, in which Chaplin, as a immigrant landing at Ellis Island in the film, kicks a immigration official in the rear end. And that did not go over well. J. Edgar Hoover politely asked Chaplin to have the scene removed from the film. Chaplin refused and would earn the lasting enmity of J. Edgar Hoover, who would grow to become the most powerful police officer, basically, our country has ever known. And the CIA, that did not go, and the FBI, I mean, all those things. He was the most powerful of them all. And so Chaplin would raise the ire of J. Edgar Hoover, who would hound Chaplin literally out of the country. Charlie Chaplin would ultimately leave the country and move to Switzerland, where he would spend the rest of his life as a result of the harassment from J. Edgar Hoover. The Immigrant is a 1917 short comedy film starring Charlie Chaplin's tramp character as an immigrant coming to the United States who's accused of theft on the voyage across the Atlantic Ocean and befriends a young woman along the way, Edna Purviance. The film is not a long one. It was just a few reels long, And it's one that I love because A, it's extraordinarily funny, but B, because it has a really good, dare I say, sweet story to tell. And so there's Chaplin there. Everybody loved to watch Chaplin. And again, I mentioned that he never wanted to ever humiliate the Tramp character. He did funny things, yes, but one of the things we always see is the Tramp character overcome those obstacles thrown at him and sort of just roll with the punches. Yeah, bad things happen to him, but he never lets them get the better of him. Chaplin admired immigrants, and so never ever wanted to do anything to make fun of them. Always sort of paying tribute to his admiration for their willingness to move forward no matter what. And so here we see some of these moving. You call them GIFs? I'll let you all decide. But you see the guy try to sit down and Chaplin pull the chair out from under him. Here's another one. Chaplin talking to a girl, flirting, and looks like a little kitty jumps on him and frightens him. And there's Edna Purviance right there. Smooth move, Chaplin. And here we have Chaplin trying to start the little propeller-guided car there, and blam, knocks himself right in the head. And here we see him getting caught in the electric bed that is preventing him from reaching it as he's trying to get to it. And, oh, here's a scene that J. Edgar Hoover would not have liked. Notice that he's kicking the police officer in the rear end. That type stuff did not go over well. J. Edgar Hoover wanted conformity to authority figures, and Chaplin wasn't about to conform to much of anything. There he is, getting smacked in the face by a little piece of pie. The next film that we're going to be watching is called The Gold Rush. And The Gold Rush, of all the films that Chaplin made, is one that he wanted to be remembered for. It's an absolutely fantastic movie, and this will be our very first multiple reel film that is equivalent to along the lines of what we have today regarding length of movies. And it's just a really, really famous movie. In short, the Tramp character travels to Alaska to take part in the Alaska Gold Rush. Bad weather strands him in a remote cabin with a prospector who's found a large gold deposit and an escaped fugitive. After which, parting ways, the prospector and the fugitive fight over the prospector's claim, ending with the prospector receiving a blow to the head and the fugitive falling off a cliff to his death. The Tramp character is eventually going to find himself in a gold rush town where he ultimately decides to give up prospecting. After taking a job looking after another prospector's cabin, he falls in love with a lonely saloon girl whom he mistakenly thinks has fallen in love with him. He soon finds himself waylaid by the prospector he met earlier in the film, who has developed amnesia and needs the Tramp to help him find his claim by leading him back to the cabin. There are 3 scenes that I want you to look for in this film that are particularly wonderful. The little Tramp starving, having to eat his own boot, a prop which was actually made out of licorice that looks really amazingly realistic. The little Tramp showing a dance to his imaginary dinner roll guests using 2 bread rolls stabbed with forks. Arguably the most famous scene in all of comedy history in American filmmaking. Charlie Chaplin's Tramp character is having a dream, and he literally stabs 2 dinner rolls with his fork and does a little dance that audiences in the theater, when they went to see this, demanded that the projectionist stop the film and play back that particular scene many, many times. You'll love it. And then finally, a house teetering on the edge of the cliff before its occupants, Chaplin and the prospector, scramble out just before it falls over the edge. So those are the 3 scenes that I'd really like for you to look for in The Gold Rush. And there is a GIF of one little scene from Chaplin's bread roll dance. Unbelievably famous scene. Both The Immigrant and The Gold Rush were selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress in the 1990s as being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. Now, the first film I mentioned that I would like for you guys to watch is going to be The Immigrant. And it's just over somewhere around 30 minutes long, maybe not even that. It was just a couple reels, I do remember that. But I do think that you'll thoroughly enjoy it. And once we get that over and done with, we will then proceed to The Gold Rush. There will be a Chaplin quiz. Don't panic. It's nothing that you need to, sweat about or lose sleep over. But it will be a little quiz over some of the big things that I mentioned to you today about Chaplin's career. So there we have it. I hope you enjoy The Immigrant and The Gold Rush, and you'll see why Chaplin remains to this day so very, very famous. There's another movie that I would really, highly recommend. It's free on YouTube. The links will be taking you to The Immigrant and The Gold Rush. But there's another one, if you like Chaplin, called The Kid, that is a tearjerker. It's a good movie, but it is definitely a tearjerker. So I hope you enjoy The Immigrant.